Hi guys, I'm Woodcraft Hamster and I wanted to do a short video today about the essentials for bushcraft, or the basics for bushcraft. I'm really getting right down to it. What do you really need kit-wise to practice bushcraft? And it's a very difficult question to answer because bushcraft means a lot of things to a lot of people. So what I wanted to do was just take a lot of the sort of the standard, the basic elements that a lot of people associate with bushcraft, just to give you a rough idea of kind of what it is you may need. You certainly don't have to have these items, but it's sort of the things that I tend to use and a lot of people I know. And I don't want to talk about particular types of kit here. It's more the fundamentals of the actual individual piece of equipment, and whether you go with this brand or that brand or whatever it may be is entirely your personal choice. But to start off with, and this is I think the biggest question most people in bushcraft come across, is do you really need a knife? The short answer is no, you don't, but then that goes back to what type of bushcraft you want to practice. So let's go on the basis that you want to carry out all of the sort of the skill and the making related parts that bushcraft can offer. So do you need a knife? If you wanted to carry out certain tasks, yes you do. If you want to do some carving, you will certainly need a bladed implement. So focusing on knives for the time being, what sort of knife do you need? Now, to be honest, it really doesn't matter, provided you have got a good quality knife that has got a sharp blade that you're able to maintain. That is all you need. Now, again, without going too heavily into brands, I'm a great advocate of Mora. They sell their knives for, I think you can pick up a decent Mora now for about £15 delivered online, and that will do absolutely every bushcraft task you would want it to do. You can go more high-end, you can get more expensive knives. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know that I own some, but I still use my Moras as well. And you can use a fixed blade knife, you can use a locking knife, you can use a pen knife, a Swiss Army knife. I always carry a Swiss Army knife with me. I've given it a good hone on a sharpening stone, on a strop, and that blade is as sharp as I need it to be. So if you want to carry out things like carving, food preparation, silly things like maybe making your own tent pegs, a knife is always really useful. I think the next big one on the list for bushcraft, especially in the UK, do you need an axe? Short answer, no you don't. Would an axe be useful to you? Absolutely. I certainly find it is for me. I do quite a lot of carving, so I'm a little bit biased in that sense. It's very, very good for preparing firewood. As I say, you can carve with it, and I find it a useful tool to have around the camp and when I'm out bushcrafting, but it's not a necessity. There are skills that you can learn with an axe that are exclusive to the axe, so if you are getting into bushcraft, or you have been for some time, and one of your focuses, if you like, is learning skills, then there are a lot of axe skills you can learn. Learning how to use an axe safely is extremely important, and once you can do that, you've got splitting, you've got chopping, you've got carving. There's so many things you can use an axe for. So no, you don't need one, but they can be useful if it sort of features in the type of bushcraft you want to carry out. Next thing is a saw, and again, a saw is not 100% necessity. However, it will allow you a little bit more freedom, and it certainly takes a lot of effort. I mean, this tree trunk that I'm sitting on now is probably 8 inches in diameter. Now I say easily with a pinch of salt, but I could cut through this tree trunk with an axe if I wanted to use it for, say, firewood. However, it would be a lot more energy efficient and a lot less effort if I was to use a saw. And I would certainly prefer to use a saw than an axe, so I always tend to carry a saw with me as well. So again, you don't need it, but it will help for certain tasks. So that covers basically the 3 basic cutting implements: a knife, an axe and a saw. A knife, if you're doing any kind of cutting work, then yes, it would be a necessity. An axe is certainly a nice to have in my opinion, but you don't need to have one, and a saw likewise. So that covers the cutting implements. Next, let's move on to something else that seems to be sort of fundamental in most people's eyes when it comes to bushcraft, and that's fire. You don't have to have a fire by any means, but I certainly find it a very nice, relaxing therapeutic almost thing to sit in front of, especially at the end of the day. Shortly before you may be thinking about turning in, you can cook your food on it. It will provide you with some warmth, and in my view, it's kind of nature's television. And I love having an open fire. Now let's stick with open fires for a second. The tools we've already talked about will help you to get that fire going. It's very, very useful to learn how to build and maintain a fire, and I'll go through that in my other videos. But again, with a fire, how do you light it? You can carry a lighter with you. I've always got a little clipper lighter in my pack, just in case for whatever reason I can't get a fire lit. But then what else can you use? You can carry a box of matches with you. No issue with that. You can quite happily have them in your pack. You can get small containers, match safes and things like that, that mean you can keep them in a dry container and you've got something to strike your match on. Ferro rods. Ferro rods have been sort of marketed by TV personalities who are into bushcraft. You've got Ray Mears and Bear Grylls, who are the two big ones that I know of here in the UK. I know there's plenty of others overseas as well. And a ferro rod has become, I think, quintessential to bushcraft. And I always carry one with me. I enjoy the achievement of lighting a fire with a ferro rod, and a lot of that comes down to good preparation of your tinder materials alongside sort of having at least a little bit of skill with a ferro rod. And again, you can pick these up so cheaply that there's no reason why you shouldn't have one. Again, you don't have to have it, but as a method of fire lighting, and certainly something that you can learn to use whilst, it's very easy to pick up a lighter, hold it under some dry sticks, and you've got a fire. There is a little bit more skill involved with a ferro rod. There are other things. You can use a bow drill, you can use a fire piston. There's plenty of other things that you can use for starting a fire, and I won't name them all here. Fire is very much a personal preference, and also it relies on whether you're allowed to have a fire or where you're practicing bushcraft. I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm able to, but not everybody is. So let's say you can't have an open fire. What are your other options? Well, you've got camping stoves. And I use a camping stove quite often. Often I'm only out for a day hike and I don't want to build a fire because it's really not necessary. Daylight today, hopefully you can see in the background behind me, it's quite sunny, it's quite a hot day. And I don't need a fire today, so if I did want, say, a hot drink, I'd just use a camping stove. And there are a multitude on the market. You can go from things really small down to sort of the size of my thumb. I have a really nice, not particularly expensive titanium stove head that is literally the same size as my thumb. That can go in a pocket, it can go in a pack, it can go wherever you like. You attach that to a gas cylinder and away you go. Now you can pick up really, really cheap ones of these for sort of £5 and £10 in camping shops, and you can go all the way up to the sort of £100 mark and beyond for these kind of really uber light, for kind of ultralight backpacking kind of things, that kind of stuff, and anything in between. You can get great big camping stove for sort of base camp, car camping, that kind of thing. It's really up to you, but fire has a multitude of uses. It can keep you warm, albeit a camping stove is not particularly great at that, but it can keep you warm. It can heat water for cooking and sterilising. It can heat and cook your food, and that's really the purposes in my mind of having a fire. If you want to go into more what should we call them, more kind of traditional bushcraft skills, you can build a fire to smoke meat. You can build a fire, you can put certain mosses or green leaves on to create a little bit of smoke to keep the mozzies away, which is almost something I'm wishing I'd done today. But that covers your cutting implements now and fires, which are, I think, as I said before, sort of quite quintessentially linked to bushcraft and what a lot of people see when they hear the word bushcraft. So moving on from that, what are the other items that you might need? So let's look at a water container, for example. So you want some form of bottle so you can carry water, or at least collect water while you're out. Now I've got several. I've got some Nalgene bottles that I find really useful. I've also got stainless steel bottles, which mean I can hang them over a fire and boil water in them. You may have seen my other videos where I've got a really nice little titanium cup. Now I bought that, or titanium mug should I say, but I bought that for two reasons. One, to drink out of, obviously, but two, it means I can put it in the embers of a fire and I can heat water that way as well. So if I'm not bringing a stainless steel bottle with me for whatever reason, I can use my plastic water bottle with water I've brought with me or collected from a stream or a pond or a lake. I can pour that into the titanium mug, put that on the fire, and I can boil that water for a cup of coffee or for cooking some food in, or whatever it is I like. So you want to consider some kind of container, be it one that you can use on a fire or not. I'd certainly recommend one that you can use on a fire if you're planning on having a fire. And again, if you get something like a titanium one or a stainless steel one, you can put that onto a camping stove as well. So that's your food and your drink sorted. Now let's have a look at shelter. There are dozens of different types of shelter you can use in bushcraft. You can go down the tarp route, and I have several tarps that I use, but some bigger, some smaller, depending on what I'm doing. If you're not planning on sleeping out, it's always an idea to consider a tarp anyway, because if the weather was to suddenly turn, let's say we had a thunderstorm just starting up behind me, I could rig up a tarp just in this little clearing that I'm sitting in at the moment, and that will protect me from the elements, and it will keep me dry until the rain has passed. Alternatively, you've got things like hammocks, and you normally go with a hammock and a tarp combo, so that you can sling the hammock between a couple of trees. It's somewhere you can sit, it's somewhere you can sleep, and then you've also got the tarp above you to protect you from the elements. Then you've got tents, and I'm a big fan of tents. I use them quite regularly. I've been through dozens of them in my time, some big, some small. I remember when I first started out in bushcraft, I had a 4-man sort of expedition style tent, sort of a dome style affair, and I was lugging that round with me through the woods for probably a good couple of years, and that's what I slept in. I had all my gear in there. People that would come camping with me would be able to sleep in it with me as well if they didn't have their own tent. And it was probably only in the last 3 or 4 years that I've kind of started looking at other options. I used a Snugpack Stratosphere for a short while, but I didn't get on with it. I then bought the Snugpack Ionosphere, which is what I use now. It's a little sort of 1-man bivvy tent, which I find really useful. And there's loads of different makes on the market that do something very, very similar. And again, you just need to consider with your shelter system, what are you going to use it for? Is it just for you? Is it for you and a friend? Are there going to be several of you? And those are the sort of questions you need to ask yourself. And in conjunction with your shelter system, you need to look at a sleeping system as well. So if you are going to be spending a night or more out in the woods, consider what it is you're going to be sleeping in. Are you going to go for a sleeping bag? Are you going to go for some form of blanket? Whichever one of those you're going to use, do you want to consider some sort of ground mat, whether that's sort of an expanding foam mat, an inflatable mat, or whatever it may be? These are the things you kind of want to consider. Now, I'm not ashamed to admit that I like to be quite comfortable when I'm outdoors. I tend to cover quite a lot of distance during the day, and what I don't want to be is lying against the cold packed ground, the cold sort of getting into my back and my spine, and I've done it before, and it's not particularly comfortable. It's not to say I wouldn't do it again, but given the choice, I would much rather be comfortable. So I tend to go with a sleeping bag. I will do another video about my full camping kit that I usually take with me at some point, but I go with a sleeping bag and I go with a roll mat. So that, in conjunction with either a hammock or a tent, will keep me dry, it will keep me warm. I've got an inflatable mat, I think it's made by Thermarest, and that's got quite a high what's known as an R rating, which is kind of the heat rating that it gives you between you and the ground. So, and it's also quite thick. It's probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick. So once it's blown up, I put my sleeping bag on top. That will keep me away from the ground, so keep me nice and warm, and the sleeping bag will provide me the rest of the warmth that I need. So again, I mean, really, those are the fundamentals in my mind of what you need to practice bushcraft. Again, depending on what you're going to do. If you're not planning on spending a night or more out in the woods or out wherever you're going, you don't need to worry about a tent or a sleeping bag or a roll mat or anything like that. If you're not planning on building fires, or you have no interest in building fires, you don't need to think about lighters, ferro rods or anything along those lines. If you're not planning on cutting or carving or anything like that, you don't need to worry about any form of tools. But again, I think most people, certainly new people I've spoken to in the last year or two coming into bushcraft, who have seen the likes of Bear Grylls and Ray Mears, Les Stroud from the States, Survivor Man and things like that, You know, that's where people are kind of getting their bushcraft information from at the moment, and that's where they're first coming into contact with it, is on TV. Now obviously good TV shows these days seem to think that it's a requirement to sort of throw people into these survival situations with very minimal tools and things like that. So that's what people are seeing, and that's what people are wanting to try out. So I think most people coming into bushcraft, this is just my opinion, you know, will have seen people making things and doing things with a knife, so they'll want to have a knife. They've seen people making fires, so they want to find a way of making them themselves. They've seen people kind of setting up either base camps or kind of you know, sort of survival shelters and things like that, and they're going to want to go and try that for themselves. Now what I would suggest, I had a very good friend of mine not long ago who's on a web forum that I'm a member of, decided to go out, and he accepted a challenge, sort of like almost like a backwoods challenge if you like, to go out and build his own shelter and stay there for the night, taking very minimal equipment with him, and he had to build a shelter, start a fire, collect some water, cook some food, and it was a really interesting experience. You know, I spoke with him at length about it after he did it, and although he really enjoyed it, he did say, and he wasn't ashamed to admit this, that he was extremely uncomfortable, and that he wouldn't want to do that for a protracted period of time. And the way he summed it up was that yes, it was very nice. I mean, I think he had something like a 20 or 25 litre day pack with him, which is very small, you know, that you can't fit much in there, and that's all he took with him. He said it was lovely being free and unencumbered, wandering around the woods with a very small pack, but when it came, you know, he had to put a lot of effort into building his shelter, a fair bit of effort into collecting his water and getting his fire going. And he said he would actually rather have a larger pack, you know, a 45 litre to 50 litre pack, which is what he usually takes, very similar to me. And he said he would rather have that larger, heavier pack and hike through the woods for a day wearing that, and be able to get to the other end and spend half an hour, set up a tent or a hammock, set up a fire, you've got your food and your water with you, and you know, he'd much prefer that than sort of really roughing it. And again, that's not to say that, you know, people shouldn't try roughing it. It's certainly something. It's an experience. I'll give it that. I say I've done it in the past, and I'd happily do it again. But it's not something I would do for every bushcraft trip that I take. Yeah, I mean, I've rambled on a little bit now, guys. I've sort of got slightly off the theme of this, but as I say, I mean, depending on what you want and what you want to get out of bushcraft will steer you towards what tools, equipment, etc. that you maybe feel that you need. In my mind, if you want to sort of you know, get the most out of bushcraft, and you want to sort of diversify and try a lot of the different skills that go with it, certain types of cutting tools, knife, axe and saw, I think can be really useful if that's something that interests you. Various types of fire lighting methods were something I learned fairly early on when I started bushcraft, and I really enjoyed it. So again, you know, looking and finding out more about those and seeing which ones you think you might like to try, a really good idea in my view. Make sure you've got something to carry water in, even if you're just going out for a walk in the woods and that's all you want to do when it comes to bushcraft. Maybe you just want to observe nature up close. Make sure you've got at least a bottle to carry your water in. If you want some kind of food or drink while you're out, either carry it with you, take a little camping stove if that's what you prefer. You know, you can heat up some water, have a cup of coffee. There's nothing nicer, in my opinion, than coming out, sitting out for a few hours in the woodland, having yourself a cup of coffee while you're out here. And again, if you are planning on spending time outdoors, certainly, you know, overnight or 2, 3, 4 days or longer, you'll need something to sleep in, on and under. So again, hammocks are really good. I will do a review of mine at some point. Tents are also great. If you want to go really basic, you know, you can go down the tarp route and just have something to go under you to insulate you from the ground, and maybe something to wrap around you to keep the cold off. And there's a multitude of different things you can do. But I hope it was useful, guys. I'm really keen to see your thoughts on this. So I hope we get some you know, some commentary going in the comments box below. Happy to answer any questions you might have. I'm really keen to get involved in some conversations with you guys, see what your preferred methods are, and if you've got any sort of opinions on what I've said today. But I hope it was useful. Hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I hope you'll all join me next time. Thanks, guys.